On the bustling streets of Manila, Manny Pacquiao drove his modest car, trying to go unnoticed through the crowd. Even after years of international fame as a legendary boxer and respected political figure, he always sought moments of normalcy in his hectic life. The intense heat of that Philippine afternoon made the asphalt seem liquid, while street vendors protected their merchandise under colorful tents. Manny had just left a Senate meeting and decided to take a different route home, passing through the old Tondo neighborhood where he had lived for a few years during his youth before moving to General Santos City. Memories of his youth invaded his mind as he watched children playing on the narrow sidewalks, reminding him of times marked by hardship and immense dreams. The smell of adobo and pancit being prepared at small food stalls awakened a deep nostalgia, transporting him back to times when hunger was a constant companion. Manny slowed down as he passed his old school, a simple concrete building that, despite its new paint, maintained the same modest structure from decades ago. Parking discreetly, Manny felt the impulse to visit the place that had shaped an important part of his character. His hands, calloused from countless fights, rested for a moment on the steering wheel as he took a deep breath, preparing for the whirlwind of emotions that always accompanied returns to his past. Fame had transformed his life, but his heart remained connected to his roots, to the people and places that helped him become who he was. Walking through the school corridors, Manny maintained a humble posture, respectfully greeting the surprised staff who recognized him. Many of the teachers from his time had retired or moved on, but the weathered walls still told silent stories of thousands of Filipino children who, like him, dreamed of a better future. The polished cement floor echoed his steps, blending with the distant murmur of classrooms, where young students received the education that would be their passport to new opportunities. Something inexplicable made him slow his pace, an intuition he couldn't explain, but that guided him toward the central courtyard of the school. It was when he arrived there that Manny witnessed a scene that froze his blood. An elderly man with a familiar appearance was cornered against a wall by a threatening individual. Even from a distance, Manny immediately recognized the gray-haired gentleman with the stooped posture. It was Professor Redenta Lagasca, his former mathematics mentor, the man who had believed in his potential when everyone else doubted. The aggressor gestured violently, his face contorted in an expression of contempt, while the old professor kept his eyes lowered in a posture of painful resignation. The intimidating man, dressed in a well-cut designer shirt with a gold watch, discreetly gleaming on his wrist, was Victor Manahan, locally known as Cobra, a feared loan shark who controlled various illegal businesses in the region. His expensive cologne lingered in the air as he demanded, in a humiliating tone, payment of a debt supposedly contracted by Professor Lagasca. The few staff present observed the scene from afar, too fearful to intervene against someone with Victor's reputation. The school janitor, Emilia Ramos, watched the scene with evident concern, paralyzed between the desire to help and the fear of making the situation worse. Manny felt his body react instinctively, the same reflex that had guided him in countless matches in the ring. His muscles tensed, but his mind worked faster, assessing the situation with the strategic calm that had made him a world champion. Professor Lagasca, now about 70 years old, seemed fragile and dejected, very different from the energetic man who used to draw formulas on the blackboard with contagious enthusiasm. His modest clothes contrasted with Victor's well-groomed appearance, highlighting the social abyss that separated the two men. Manny's eyes captured important details. The professor's trembling hands holding a worn folder, probably containing student work, cold sweat running down his wrinkled forehead, and the small group of students watching the scene from a distance, with expressions mixing fear and indignation. A young student, sneaking through the corridors, ran to seek help, while Victor continued. His intimidation, moving increasingly closer to the elderly man, deliberately invading his personal space in a threatening manner, a predator playing with his prey before the final attack. Time seemed to slow down as Manny processed his options. He could easily use his influence to drive Victor away, or even his physical strength to impose immediate respect. However, years of experience had taught him that the direct approach wasn't always the most effective. His journey from poor boy to global icon had been built not only with fists, but with intelligence and dignity. The situation required not just courage, but wisdom to solve the problem without creating even bigger ones. With firm and determined steps, Manny advanced toward the two men, maintaining a serene expression that perfectly masked the storm of emotions inside him. The school courtyard, once the stage for many innocent games from his youth, now witnessed the confrontation between three men whose lives had followed drastically different paths. Victor, absorbed in his demonstration of power, didn't notice the approach of the boxing legend, while Professor Legasca, with his eyes downcast, remained unaware of the arrival of his former student, now one of the most powerful and respected figures in the country. Manny's shadow projected over the two men, alerting Victor to his presence. The loan shark turned with irritation, ready to dismiss the intruder, but his face instantly transformed upon recognizing the world champion. His eyes widened in a mixture of surprise and apprehension, while his arrogant posture vanished like mist under the strong sun. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of children playing in some corner of the school complex, unaware of the drama unfolding in the main courtyard. Professor Legasca slowly raised his gaze, confusion evident in his tired features. Upon recognizing his former student, a gleam of disbelief illuminated his eyes. The wrinkles on his face seemed to deepen with contained emotion, as he tried to process the surreal presence of Manny at this critical moment. Victor, sensing the change in power dynamics, instinctively stepped back, his predatory behavior replaced by a calculating caution, typical of those accustomed to navigating dangerous situations. Manny remained calm, his body relaxed, but his eyes communicated an intensity that few men would dare challenge. He respectfully greeted his former professor with a traditional Filipino bow, completely ignoring Victor for a few crucial moments, a subtle demonstration of who truly deserved his respect. The gesture, simple but powerful, reaffirmed values that Manny had carried since his humble childhood: the importance of education, respect for elders, dignity even in the most adverse circumstances. The atmosphere in the courtyard transformed with Manny's presence. Amelia, the janitor, had discreetly called Directora Elena Macareg, who now observed the scene from the courtyard entrance, ready to intervene if necessary. Victor, feeling increasingly uncomfortable, tried to regain his composure, forcing an artificial smile that didn't reach his calculating eyes. His body language betrayed his discomfort as he tried to adapt to the new reality where he was no longer the most powerful man in the environment. With calm gestures, Manny led his former professor to a nearby bench, offering physical and emotional support. The elderly man trembled slightly, decades of dignity and service to education painfully contrasting with the public humiliation he had just suffered. Victor remained standing, undecided between maintaining his pursuit or strategically retreating. His local reputation was at stake, but confronting a figure of Manny Pacquiao's caliber could have devastating consequences for his business and personal safety. Seated on the bench worn by time and tropical climate, Manny listened attentively to Professor Legasca's story. The elderly man explained in a low voice how he had taken out a loan to pay for his wife Amihan's medical treatment, who was fighting against aggressive cancer. With his modest salary as a retired teacher, he had turned to Victor when banks refused his credit application. The abusive interest rates, however, had transformed a manageable debt into an impossible amount, growing exponentially with each passing month. The professor's wrinkled hands trembled as he explained how Victor had begun to threaten him, first with intimidating visits to his home, then with veiled threats against his grandchildren. His voice broke as he recounted how he had sold almost all his valuable possessions, including rare books collected over decades and even Amihan's family jewelry. Even so, the debt seemed like a bottomless pit, consuming not only his financial resources but also his peace and dignity. Victor remained a few meters away, pretending indifference while checking his cell phone, but Manny noticed how he remained attentive to the conversation. Directora Macareg approached discreetly, a middle-aged woman with a firm posture and compassionate gaze, who offered the privacy of her office to continue the conversation. A young physical education teacher, Benji Santos, strategically positioned himself near Victor, his athletic presence serving as a silent reminder that the loan shark could not leave with impunity should he try something reckless. Manny listened with attention and respect, recalling how Professor Lagaska had changed his life decades ago. When young and without prospects, it had been this same man who identified his potential, not only encouraging him in his studies, but also being the first to speak to him about the importance of discipline and perseverance. Lagaska had been more than a teacher. He had been a mentor who planted seeds of self-confidence in a boy who only knew scarcity and the limitations imposed by extreme poverty. The professor's story deeply touched Manny, who recognized in it a pattern sadly common in the Philippines. Honest and hard-working people forced into desperate situations by a system that frequently fails to protect the most vulnerable. Poor health, low educator salaries, and the predatory presence of loan sharks formed a perfect storm that destroyed lives daily in the country. Behind the facade of progress in big cities, stories like Professor Lagaska's repeated by the thousands, invisible to many but painfully real to those living them. As the Philippine sun began its descent on the horizon, painting the sky with orange tones that reflected in the school windows, Manny made his decision. With a respectful gesture, he excused himself from the professor and walked directly toward Victor, who immediately straightened his posture, a mixture of arrogance and nervousness stamped on his face. Directora Macareg watched attentively, while Benji remained alert, ready to intervene should the situation escalate to something more tense. Manny stopped a few steps from Victor, maintaining a distance that respected social norms, but close, enough to establish clear communication. His voice, calm and controlled, contrasted with the palpable tension in the air. Without threats or demonstrations of physical force, Manny spoke about respect, dignity, and the true meaning of strength. He mentioned how truly powerful men protect the vulnerable instead of exploiting them, and how true wealth is not measured by money or luxury objects, but by the positive impact we cause in others' lives. Victor listened in forced silence, his discomfort increasing with each word. The contrast between the two men could not be more evident. Manny, dressed simply but elegantly, emanated a natural authority that came from within, while Victor, despite his groomed appearance and expensive accessories, seemed to diminish with each second. A small student named Liwewe observed the scene from the library door, her eyes shining with admiration as she saw her national hero defending the values that her teachers tried so hard to teach. With calculated gestures, Manny removed his wallet and extracted a business card that he handed to Victor. He explained that he would like to definitively resolve Professor Lagaska's situation and asked Victor to meet him at his office the next day, with all documents related to the debt. His proposal wasn't a suggestion, but it also didn't sound like a threat. It was simply the declaration of a man accustomed to finding solutions where others saw only problems. Victor, recognizing the futility of any resistance, silently nodded, putting the card in his shirt pocket. As Victor hastily walked away, visibly anxious to leave that embarrassing situation, Manny returned to Professor Lagaska. The elderly man tried to contain his tears, a lifetime of pride fighting against the overwhelming emotion of that unexpected moment. Directora Macareg gently offered her office for a more private conversation. In the principal's simple office, decorated with educational certificates and photos of graduated classes, Manny assured Professor Lagaska that his debt would be resolved. However, more important than the financial aspect, he expressed his gratitude for the impact the professor had had on his life, sharing specific memories of his teachings that had shaped not only his career, but his fundamental values. The next morning, Manny's office in Manila's financial center pulsed with its usual energy. Advisors, security personnel, and assistants moved efficiently through the elegant corridors, where framed photos showed landmark moments in the boxer's career, interspersed with images of charitable projects and political achievements. Victor Manahan arrived punctually, dressed even more formally than the day before, as if his clothes could serve as armor against the uncomfortable situation he would face. Manny's secretary, Jasmine Lualhati, a young professional with a serious expression and impeccable efficiency, led Victor to a meeting room where Manny awaited him. By his side was Marco Romualdez, his longtime lawyer, a middle-aged man with perceptive eyes that analyzed every detail. The atmosphere in the room dramatically contrasted with the confrontation in the school courtyard. Here, in corporate territory, the rules of the game were different, but the power imbalance remained the same, now amplified by the professional environment and the lawyer's presence. Victor handed over a folder containing the documents related to Professor Lagasca's loan. The papers, many of them handwritten with deliberately confusing terms, revealed the predatory nature of the agreement. Marco examined each page with meticulous attention, occasionally making notes or consulting legal codes on his tablet. His face remained impassive, but his body language clearly communicated that he found significant irregularities in the presented documents. After a detailed analysis that extended for more than 2 hours, Marco explained in precise terms the multiple legal violations present in the contract. He mentioned specific laws against loan sharking, highlighted abusive clauses, and pointed out how the compound interest applied far exceeded the limits permitted by Philippine legislation. Victor listened in tense silence, his face alternating between paleness and flushing as the extent of his legal vulnerability became increasingly evident. What previously seemed like a lucrative business at the expense of a defenseless elderly man now revealed itself as a potential legal disaster that could cost him not only money but possibly his freedom. Manny, who had remained silent during the legal analysis, finally spoke. His proposal was simple. He would pay the principal amount of the loan without the abusive interest, and in exchange, Victor would surrender all original documents and sign a declaration formalizing the definitive closure of the debt. Additionally, Victor should commit to no longer pursuing Professor Lagasca or any member of his family. The implicit alternative, though never directly verbalized, was to face a potentially devastating legal process with the weight of Manny Pacquiao's name and influence supporting the accusation. After several hours of intense analysis and direct discussions, everything was resolved that same day. Victor, anxious to close that chapter and minimize possible damage to his reputation and business, cooperated with surprising docility. His previous arrogance had been replaced by a forced courtesy that barely disguised his discomfort. After the final formalities, he left the office without looking back, his hurried walk revealing his desire to quickly distance himself from that humiliating situation. That same afternoon, Manny drove again to the Tondo neighborhood, this time accompanied by Marco. The courtyard, which the day before had been a stage of humiliation, now vibrated with the typical energy of the end of the school day. Some children recognized him, but Benji, the physical education teacher, discreetly helped maintain a respectful space around Manny. Little Liwei, the student who had observed the scene the day before, timidly approached to deliver a simple but heartfelt drawing that portrayed Manny as a hero in a ring, with words of thanks scribbled in childish letters. In Professor Lagasca's small apartment, located a few blocks from the school, a moving scene unfolded. Manny personally delivered the cancelled documents and a letter officially confirming the complete settlement of the debt. The elderly man, accompanied by his wife Amihan, seated in a simple wheelchair, received the news with overflowing emotion. The modest apartment, decorated with family photographs and educational awards accumulated during decades of dedication to teaching, seemed illuminated by a new hope that transcended its weathered walls. Amihan, despite being visibly debilitated by the disease, demonstrated a serene dignity that moved Manny. Her bright eyes revealed the inner strength that sustained her through physical suffering and financial difficulties. She held her husband's hands as he tried to express his gratitude, words that seemed insufficient given the magnitude of the gesture. The simplicity of the home contrasted with the grandeur of the feelings that filled the environment, creating a moment of human connection that transcended differences in social status or financial condition. During the conversation that followed, Manny discovered more about the couple's current life. Besides the medical expenses for Amihan's treatment, they helped support 2 grandchildren, children of their only daughter, who had died in an accident 3 years earlier. The children, Ligaya and Ramon, studied at the same school where Professor Lagasca had dedicated his professional life and now lived with their grandparents in precarious financial conditions. Despite the difficulties, the elderly man continued offering free private lessons to low-income students, keeping his passion for teaching alive even after his official retirement. 2 weeks later, a small meeting was taking place at the Lagasca home. Manny had returned, this time accompanied by Jasmine and Dr. Isabella Cruz, a renowned oncologist from a private hospital in Manila. The apartment, which previously reflected the weight of financial difficulties, now displayed small but significant improvements. A new wheelchair for Amihan, medications organized on a newly installed shelf, and an air of relief that hovered in the environment like a revitalizing breeze after a long storm. Dr. Cruz explained in detail the new treatment plan for Amihan, made possible by Manny. Without fanfare or publicity, he had guaranteed access to the best specialists and available medications, offering the elderly woman a real chance of recovery that previously seemed impossible. The couple listened attentively to the medical explanations, their hands intertwined in a silent gesture of shared hope. The grandchildren, Ligaya and Ramon, timidly observed from the entrance of the small corridor, their eyes alternating between the illustrious visitors and the emotional faces of their grandparents. Jasmine discreetly presented the documents establishing an educational fund for the professor's grandchildren. The scholarship would guarantee not only the continuity of their basic education, but also their eventual access to university, a dream that Professor Lagasca had feared was out of reach due to the circumstances. The elderly man tried to protest, overcome by the generosity, but Manny calmly explained that it wasn't charity, but an investment in the Philippines' future through its most promising children. Before saying goodbye, Manny shared a personal reflection with his former professor. He spoke about how the knowledge and values transmitted in classrooms often generate fruits that educators never get to witness. He mentioned how Professor Lagasca's words of encouragement had echoed in his mind during crucial moments of his career, serving as a moral compass in a world of temptations and compromises. The elderly man listened with tears in his eyes, finally understanding the true reach of his life dedicated to education. As he left the modest apartment that sunny afternoon, Manny reflected on life's cycles and the invisible interconnections that unite people across time. His gesture of gratitude and justice had not only transformed the immediate reality of Professor Lagasca and his family, but also reaffirmed fundamental values that transcended his fame and wealth. In a world where success is often measured only by material achievements and public recognition, Manny had chosen to honor his roots and give back to one of the many mentors who made his journey possible. Beyond the headlines about his victories in the ring or his political initiatives, it was in moments like this that the true essence of the Filipino champion was revealed, not only in his physical strength, but in his moral integrity and his unwavering connection to the people and values that formed him. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to our channel.